everyone, this is my week's reflection on chapters 10 through 12 of Ishmael. Chapters 10 through 12 are where Ishmael really starts to shift for me. Up until this point, it mostly feels like Quinn is pointing out everything that's wrong with how we live, but here it's more like he's asking what we've actually lost and what it would even mean to get it back. And also, I can't ignore the fact that all of this is happening while Ishmael is literally sitting in a cage at a carnival in the rain. It's kind of sad, kind of absurd, and I feel like that contrast is intentional. Like the most important ideas are being ignored right in front of everyone. So chapter 10 introduces this idea of cultural memory, which I think is one of the most important ideas in this section. Ishmael basically explains that culture isn't just traditions or habits, it's the accumulation of everything humans have learned about how to live over time. And Lever culture had millions of years of that, just knowledge built through trial and error about what actually works for living well. But then Taker culture comes in with agriculture and kind of cuts that off, deciding the past doesn't matter and focusing instead on production and control. And what really stuck with me is that we don't even feel like we lost anything because we've been taught that the past was useless anyway. It explains why we're always searching for answers instead of already having some kind of foundation to live by. That connects to another idea that really stood out to me, which is that when a culture disappears, it's not just the people that are gone, it's their knowledge too, permanently, like extinction. And I feel like we don't usually think about it that way. We tend to see certain cultures, especially indigenous ones, as outdated or less advanced, when they might actually hold knowledge that we've completely lost and can't recover. Then, chapter 11 gets into why the Taker lifestyle even started in the first place, and it's not really what you expect. It's not about food or survival, it comes down to control. The Takers didn't want to live in the hands of the gods, meaning they didn't want to depend on nature or anything outside of human control. And honestly, that part feels very human. Of course, people don't want to feel helpless, but Ishmael's point is that the cost of that control is huge. By trying to control everything, we removed ourselves from the natural system that all other life is a part of. He even connects this to evolution, saying that life developed the way it did because species stayed within that system. So when humans stepped outside of it, we kind of stopped participating in that process. That idea is uncomfortable, but it makes you question whether what we call progress is actually growth or just control. Then, in chapter 12, everything gets simplified into one really clear contrast. The Taker story is that the world belongs to humans, and the Lever story is that the humans belong to the world, and that's basically the entire difference. Once it's put that simply, it's hard to ignore. It reframes everything about how we think about our place here. Instead of being the center or the end point, we're just one part of an ongoing process of life. What surprised me is that Ishmael doesn't really give a detailed solution. It's not about policies or specific actions, it's more about changing the story. Teaching others and letting go of the idea that humans get to decide everything about life and death. It almost feels too simple, but at the same time it makes sense in a bigger way. That leads into the discussion question. Quinn is basically arguing that you can't change behavior without changing the story people are living in, and that you can't just remove a story, you need a better one to replace it. I think he's partly right. I do agree that story shapes how people see the world, and that affects how they act. If you believe humans are meant to dominate nature, you are going to behave differently than if you believe you are part of it. So in that sense, story is really important. But I don't think it's completely true that behavior always follows story first. There are a lot of examples where behavior changes before beliefs do. Laws are a good example. People didn't all of a sudden change their beliefs about things like civil rights or environmental issues overnight, but laws still force changes in behavior. And over time, beliefs started to shift because behavior had already changed. So I think it can go both ways. I also think Quinn might be using story as kind of a catch-all for a lot of things, beliefs, values, culture, even systems. And because of that, it can feel like he's simplifying what actually makes people act differently. Changing behavior isn't just about having a better story. It also involves things like power, economics, habits, and access. That being said, I do think his second point is really strong. You can't just take a way of living without replacing it with something meaningful. That probably explains why movements like the counterculture in the 60s didn't fully succeed. They rejected the dominant system, but didn't have a clear alternative to live inside of. And the Lever story is definitely compelling, but I don't think it's good enough on its own. it's enough on its own. Just believing that humans belong to the world doesn't automatically show people how to live differently in modern society. There's still a gap between the idea and actual behavior. So overall, I'd say Quinn is right that story is a huge part of change, but it's not the only thing, and it doesn't always come first. Real change probably happens when story, behavior, and systems all start shifting together. At the end of all of this, I think Quinn is really changing the question. Instead of asking what should we do, he's asking what story are we living in? And that's a harder question, but probably a more important one. These chapters feel less like criticism and more like an invitation to rethink what it actually means to be human, and what it might look like to live differently moving forward. Thank you.